Hello, everybody. I'm Despina from Product-Led Growth Hub, and we are back with another yet interview about Product Ops with Srinivas from Calendly, the head of Product Ops. Srinivas, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so excited to have you here. And before we dive into it, we would love to hear a bit for your background for people that perhaps were not in our last conference in PLG Disrupt, where you had a talk again about Product Ops.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to providing any guidance I can around product operations. As Despina mentioned, my name is Srinivas Somayajula. I lead the product operations organization with Calendly. I've been with Calendly now for about 10, 11 months or so. Prior to Calendly, I was the director of product for a core marketing platform at MailChimp. So most of the marketing automation capabilities that you experience with MailChimp, I had the product management responsibility for. And prior to MailChimp, I had spent about 15, 16 years in management consulting with companies like Accenture, Deloitte, basically doing anything from technology strategy, corporate strategy, market intelligence. But the common thread throughout all of them has been around product. So in that time, as well as at MailChimp and at Calendly, the three flavors of product-oriented work that I specialize in is number one, very high-level strategy. Where's the business going? How does the product support that strategy? Number two, once we have that strategy in place, how do you kickstart the major efforts? How do you do roadmap planning? How do you get things lined up to make sure you're maximizing success of your business outcomes as well as your product outcomes? And then number three, building a team, building product management capabilities, building product management competence within an organization. So in summary, those three things kind of sum up everything I've done throughout my career.
And this is, I guess, the first time you have you run a product ops team in general, or have you run product operations partially in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think in name, I would say leading a product operations organization, this would be the one. But by virtue of everything I've done, you're always sort of doing product operations, because the way I think about product operations is it's about grooming and coaching a team to deliver the maximum outcomes for a product. It's around process discipline and craft mastery around product management. It's the strategy work. It's the analytics. It's the rote analysis you have to sort of dig into to understand what's going to drive success of the product. So by label, yes, this would be the first time I'm leading a product operations function, but by just task, I've been in product operations, I would say, my entire career.
And if we can dive a bit more into it, what motivated you to run a product ops team? I'm only asking because product ops is not like a standard role in every SaaS organization, and it's pretty much an emerging role or team across PLG organizations. So we would love to know, me and our audience, obviously, what got you there, if it is a challenge, if it is something like, a progression of your career, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different vantage points, right? One is, I think as a former product manager, I empathize the difficulty of the job, right? So not only as a former product manager, but of a leader of a product organization, I understand how hard the job is fundamentally. And if you look at where we're going with technology, the job is getting harder and harder, right? So a product manager now is responsible for not only coming up with a strategy and vision for their product, but then coming up with the roadmap and decomposing that into, the 12 to 18 month roadmap or plan. And then in the midst of it, managing changes and stakeholder and customer feedback, learning how to do experimentation, learning how to do successful unbiased research, learning how to do product partnerships to drive KPIs forward, setting KPIs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? And in the midst of it, you're also sort of playing intermediary between, customers, leadership, the business goals, and your product team and your squad and domain. So you're trying to manage and balance a lot of stakeholders. The role is getting harder and harder as more technology companies prop up and more sort of interconnectedness is happening, right? So with that sort of empathy in mind, every product leader sort of naturally gravitates towards, well, how can I make the job easier, right? How can I build up scalable systems? How can I build up scalable processes? what additional functions do I need to create within an organization? And when you start doing that, which is what we did quite a bit at MailChimp, and even in the short time I've been at Calendly, we're starting to grow and scale up the team and bring in different functions. Next thing you know it, you have these different functions. There needs to be somebody who's coordinating and mediating all of these things, right? So naturally, there's an evolution towards the product manager's job is hard. More and more tasks are getting added on. To support them, you start adding additional functions within the organization. But once you add additional functions, you need to be able to effectively coordinate, not just within a product team, but also across the organization. So I think there's a natural evolution. We're going to see more and more of this product operations function coming up. And what's interesting also is design as a function is now, spinning up design operations, right? Engineering has created many sort of blank ops functions. So I think every function is realizing the job is getting harder and harder, and we have to evolve to sort of drive that operational excellence with focus and coordination.
Okay, fantastic. And that brings me to my next question. Since there are so many functions and product ops are emerging and responsibilities can really look different per organization, depending always on what's most important for every business. So in short, we categorize them as outcomes-driven, efficiency-focused, and customer-centric. In which bucket do you think your team's responsibilities fall, if it is one or all of them, or just some of them?
Yeah, good question. So the way I've conceptualized product operations function is essentially trying to meet all of those, right? At the end of the day, we are trying to deliver value to customers. So customer centricity is at the heart of what we do. And we have to balance that with not only the outcomes that our customers are after, but also us as a business is after as well. So we are fundamentally outcomes driven as well. But in order to do this effectively, there is an efficiency play as well. So at Calendly, the way I categorize what we do in product operations is across 4 different key things. One is around analytics and research. So fundamentally, we have to support what our customers' needs as well as our business outcomes are. And a core function to do that effectively is through analytics and research. Number 2, process excellence. So aligned to this notion of efficiency, we're getting a lot of customer feedback where we understand what we're trying to do as a business. Now, how do we maximize the success of the outcomes as well as what our customers needs through mastering sort of product delivery and being efficient in that sense? So identifying processes that need to be fixed and then driving process excellence. Number 3 is product can't work in isolation to deliver to our customers. So we have to coordinate across the organization. So communication, collaboration, and coordination is a key function of product operations. And how that looks is it could be as simple as bringing functions to a table to solve a process problem and making sure we're coordinating effectively, or producing a monthly newsletter so everybody in the organization knows what product is doing and what product features and capabilities are coming out for our customers, various different things, but fundamentally to drive increased awareness of product activities as well as communication and collaboration. The 4th thing is I'm a big believer in mentorship. So creating effective scaling systems within the organization across all the teams, but then specifically in product to drive learning and growth of the people that sit in a product organization. So that could be, working with each individual against our competency model and saying, hey, you are doing really well here, but you have some weaknesses here. So let's put a professional development plan in place to drive, improvement, or bringing in sort of scale coaching and mentoring sessions with industry best practice leaders and so on and so forth. So in summary, analytics and research, process excellence, communication, coordination, collaboration, and learning and growth are sort of the 4 key functions that we focus on. And coming back to your question, that effectively drives, being outcomes driven, efficiency focused, and customer centric.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I want to move forward and say that at Product-Led Growth Hub, we believe that product ops are the heart of every PLG organization, thus this research. And we know that Calendly, if you are into PLG even for a second, you know that Calendly is a paragon for PLG in the ecosystem. but we would love to know how product ops help sustain your goals closer to product-led growth. And not only through acquisition, through retention, through expansion, I mean, throughout the customer journey.
Absolutely. Good question. So when our founder, Tope Awatana, started the company, he created a great product that achieved product market fit. And inherently, the way the product is built, we have sort of a virality and a flywheel that helps us sort of be that product-led growth company, right? So when somebody shares a Calendly link, inherently in that, there are two parties that are engaging in that transaction of scheduling a meeting. And one party already knows the value of Calendly, the second party experiences the value of Calendly, and then that's where our viral loop kind of goes, right? So once we've achieved that point of product market fit and virality has taken over, the hard part is, one, not necessarily sustaining that, but sustaining that as you continue to evolve your platform, right? So as we evolve our platform, we are adding a lot of capabilities as requested by our customers and really truly understanding their problem statements. In that, what a product operations function helps us do is across those 4 dimensions I talked about around analytics, research, process excellence, communication coordination, and learning and growth. At the heart of it, our analytics and research function helps us continue to stay close to the customer, right? So one of the biggest sort of outcomes that I look for in that research function is, are we really understanding the customer across the Calendly platform, right? So not just about, an individual product feature or capability, but what are our customers doing? What are they trying to accomplish with Calendly, without Calendly? How does their business work? And sort of sourcing that unbiased research to then at scale, bring that in, synthesize the insights, share it effectively with our product teams to make sure we're continuing to invest in the right areas of our platform as not to disrupt our viral flywheel and everything Tope has done to make us a PLG, right? Second is process excellence. Again, as you sort of evolve the platform, there's capabilities that we want to bring where we're in context of the application, learning and continue to evolve the platform the right way. Namely, one thing that we're investing in a process excellence manner is experimentation. So how do you do effective experimentation? How do you craft the hypotheses? What are the core experiences we need to experiment around? How do you, what is a control? What is a variant? Sort of putting these disciplines in place where we're effectively doing that and sort of scaling that across the product organization, right? The other function to sort of continue the narrative around coordination, to me, fundamentally, a product-led growth company, while the label product is in PLG, it's actually a unification of the entire experience that we deliver to our customers that manifests the product-led growth, right? So we work in concert with our customer experience teams to make sure they're well aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and using them as a proxy or advocates on behalf of our customers to ensure we're delivering products effectively to our existing customers, as well as working with sales teams to understand the future needs of our prospective customers and bringing that back into the product organization. So I'd say in that sense, we've achieved sort of product market fit. We're still that PLG, but as you evolve the platform, as you learn more about the customer journey and what their needs are, we need to sort of bring those at scale insights into the organization and then have a marrying process that sort of effectively takes those and puts those into action.
Okay, that was very insightful. So thank you so much. You already discussed cross collaboration within Calendly, and I would like to make this a bit more specific. And if you can actually mention the key partners of your team outside of the product management team or the product ops team per se. How do you achieve cross alignment? I mean, I personally believe that the North Star metric is there. It should be there for every organization, PLG or not, to drive that KPI across every department. And it's so difficult to achieve that. So for us, product ops should harmonize this process, make the North Star metric the one ultimate goal where all KPIs will wrap around. So if you can give us a context around that, it would be great.
Yep. Yeah, so maybe some clarifying statements first. When we say product organization, for us, that's sort of inclusive of product management and design. And I know different product organizations have different functions that make up the team, but let's assume for a second a product organization is inclusive of product management and design and content and some of those disciplines. If you assume that, some of the key partners that we work with are obviously our go-to-market teams, so sales and marketing, our customer experience team, who serve our very diverse customer base all the way from the single user to large teams and what we call managed accounts, and then our operations teams as well. So to sort of touch on each of those, as a company, we have moved towards adopting a very disciplined and rigorous planning process, right? And the core of that planning process is establishing strategic priorities that then decompose into very specific OKRs for Calendly as a company, and then individual disciplines. So when we try to drive alignment as product operations across the company, is first we come back to those core OKRs, right? What are we trying to accomplish as a company? Whether that be net new customer acquisition or retention or activation, or a new strategic priority around a vertical or a functional segment or what have you, we have to rally around that and make sure we're keeping that at the center of the discussion. But what you also can't lose is, if that's your ambition, you still have a business to run. So how do you straddle the line and balance the business to run versus where you're moving? So we've actually installed a very disciplined process to take us through that laddering exercise of strategic priorities as well as OKRs. Our OKRs actually cover the balance of what are we trying to do net new versus what are we trying to improve as an operational business. So with that sort of context in mind, with sales and marketing, product ops is sort of the key enablement function to do a couple things. Number one, make sure those teams are well aware of what our roadmap is right now and giving them complete visibility into what we're doing and why we're doing it, but then also bringing them as partners to the table to provide us the insights of what we should be investing in as well, right? So the way we do that is, again, it comes back to what are the strategic priorities versus what are we trying to improve operationally, and where are the gaps? And somebody has to sort of bring everybody to the table and drive that discussion and alignment. But I'm happy to say that we have that anchor in our disciplined strategic planning process to support that, right? With our customer experience teams, very similar, where a lot of that is, it gets a little more tactical on how much lead time do I need to give you about when we're releasing something, what is the specific information you need, when we're communicating to your customers, how are they receiving this information, how can we help you effectively scale yourselves, and what information do you need to provide to our customers? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they're happy, right? So that's how we partner with our customer experience team. And then our operations team is super important as well. As a enablement function ourselves in product operations, we have to partner with our sort of Calendly enablement function, our key operations function. And we do a number of different things to partner with them. Number one still comes back to anchoring to what's that KPI we're after and how are we doing that. And for example, our operations function includes legal, security, compliance, things like that. So if product operations sees a bottleneck in that, sales is not effectively be able to sell something that product has built because there is a legal or a security bottleneck, we're sort of the mediators to bring everybody to the table to drive that discussion, right? So it's things like that, but it's still core. Coming back to your question, we have a rigorous planning process that we've installed as a company that's driven by strategic priorities and OKRs. And as a product operations function, we have to make sure we're rallying to that and come back and bring everybody to that anchoring point.
Okay, that was very thorough. And you discussed about OKRs. and we love OKRs and KPIs here a lot, and mainly when it has to do with the product. So if you can mention a few that stakeholders outside of the product ops team may use with you as product ops to align. I mean, you mentioned feedback earlier. Feedback is just so much. We will get into that later on. But which would be, the key differentiators when they communicate effectively with the product ops team, and how the product ops team translate that into processes.
Yep. Yeah. So at the end of the day, for us, it sort of goes back to the question you're asking earlier around the customer journey, right? So activation, acquisition, or acquisition, activation, retention. And the other one we sort of look at beyond activation is just sustained usage or active usage, right? So when I partner with all the different functional leaders, whether it's go-to-market teams or operations teams or customer experience teams, it comes back to which part of the journey do they impact, and is the product team effectively providing what they need in terms of whether it's product investments or key information to drive those. So, as an example, sales teams naturally are focused on acquisition. So given that, do I understand what their sales targets are and what their acquisition targets are? And for us, we have a revenue function. So we have a chief revenue officer who is responsible for both sales and marketing. So from the sales side, what are the new segments we're going after? What are your sales targets from an acquisition perspective? On the marketing side, it's also what sort of broad brand marketing initiatives are we doing to drive greater impressions and website visits? And then with product marketing, it gets a little more granular with working with our individual product teams, right? So working with them specifically on acquisition. Our customer experience teams are focused on going across the journey further, activation, active usage, and retention. So they cover a spectrum of that. So in that sense, what we work with them, going back to one of the functions that I own as part of product operations, is analytics and research. So really understanding at scale, what are the blockers for our customers to activate? So let's deep dive into the support tickets. Let's do text analysis around our support tickets to really understand. I work with our CX leader on our NPS score to make sure we're rounding out what are the things that are causing detractors or passives within the NPS score. And really, again, bringing all that information at scale to make sure we clearly are driving people to activate within the platform. And then moving across further, using that sort of same data again and using them as proxies or liaisons into our customers to understand where's active usage and inactive activity happening, and how can we use them as a vehicle to nudge. So in that sense, our customer experience team has done a phenomenal job to sort of sit with customers and have an outcomes-based discussion of, this is the amount of time we've saved your organization within a year by using Calendly, right? So that helps us sort of understand, A, what's the ROI for that specific customer and how does that scale across the organization? And B, where are users not actively using the platform, and how can we drive that ROI conversation better in the product or even outside the product to make sure we're driving active usage, right? And retention is a fairly easy one to talk about. We're ultimately trying to keep our customers and keep them happy. So learning from them as much as possible, even learning from customers that recently churned, is a lot of what we focus on and partner with our CX teams on. Okay,
and we talked a lot about feedback directly or indirectly here. So my next one will be customer feedback is everywhere. Now that we have a product that actually is able, to gather feedback, it's even more complicated. So as a product ops team, how do you manage that? We have a lot of feedback that does not align anywhere, neither the vision or the mission, or is just one use case, or perhaps a case from a big customer that you need to consider, but you cannot alter the rest of the things that are going on. So as a product ops team, how are you able, to align it internally in your team and then pass the message to the rest of the stakeholders in the organization?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it starts with a couple key points that you brought up. One is you have to have a catalog of the feedback to have effective conversations, right? So number one, what we've done is I've partnered with the different leaders within the organization to understand what are all the sources of feedback, right? And when you start doing that, to your point, you understand there is a plethora of sources of feedback, some that we over index on and listen to a lot, others that we don't listen to at all. So then you have to go through an exercise to say, of all the sources of feedback we have, which one is valuable and which one is not valuable and why, right? And I think that why question is critical. And you have to have all the functions at the table to sort of have that dialogue and coordinate and align around that, right? So once we've gone through that exercise, we realize that we need to get, frankly, better about getting a good pulse on the voice of the customer, right? So we're investing heavily in a tool stack to not a completely net new capabilities but how do we bring all the feedback that we have into a central repository to then be able to just look at it and understand, right? So once we have that, then you have to overlay, the customer sort of layer on top of that, right? So to your point about, is it one customer? Is it 10 customers? Is it 1,000 customers? You have to be able to build the magnitude around that feedback to then be able to effectively bring that back to the product team and then react to it, right? So that analytics and research function within the product organization is solely responsible for doing that. So not just A, what is the insights and what are the feedback that are coming back, but B, what is the magnitude, the volume, the frequency of it, and formulate hypotheses to then go further validate with customers, is this a thing or not, right? And you can't always just throw out a feedback point or an insight point because one customer said it, because you have to turn that into a hypothesis and go validate if there are other customers in the ecosystem that feel the same way that just haven't provided you that feedback yet. So while we take into consideration volume and frequency, we still keep a pulse on, even if it's low volume, low frequency feedback, working with our sales teams to further validate the hypotheses, working with our CX team to validate, is this bigger than just one person, and so on and so forth.
Okay, and I want to make a bit more, go a bit more in depth here and ask if you can share some, best practices. For example, something you do internally as a process that helps into distilling that feedback that is actually useful, and perhaps the tool stack that accompanies this process. We have a dedicated tool stack session here in the hub, but honestly, there's just so many processes and tools now out there. And I think that every single product leader is getting a bit lost when to try, which to try, and when to iterate the process per se.
Yep. Yeah, so one best practice that we started moving towards is we have a lot of sort of outside the app, outside of the customer journey surveys that happen, right? So, and when I say outside of the customer journey, it's naturally across a customer journey, but like it's not in context of when the person is experiencing an aspect of the customer journey. So what we recently brought in is a tool called Usabilla, which allows us to get in context in the app while the person is in their workflow to collect feedback, right? And it's a pretty powerful tool in the sense of it gives us not just information about, the feedback itself, but it lets us really understand who the customer was, what were they trying to do, get a little more context around, what frame were they in when they were trying to accomplish something. So it's a pretty powerful tool. And we can gather generic feedback that customers want to provide for us, or we can sort of insert feedback elements on specific areas where we're testing hypotheses and so on and so forth. Number one, that's number one. Number two, Optimizely is another tool that we're investing in. That it's to me, experimentation is a research and a feedback function. So in that sense, we're bringing in Optimizely not just for experimentation, but also to support our feature flagging infrastructure. But from a feedback perspective, experimentation, so being able to do A/B testing, training the organization from a process perspective of how to do those effectively, how to source statistically significant feedback, and then be able to react on it at scale, right? Number three, our CX leader has brought in Qualtrics as a tool to be the central repository and hub for experience management across the company. So rather than having these disparate different sources of feedback, we now have a centralized repository, the Qualtrics XM tool, that lets us put all that in one place, marry that with customer data, run any sort of analytics that we want on it, and then be able to do that. We're in the early stages of implementation, but I'm pretty excited about the feedback that comes in.
Fantastic.
Yep.
And we talked a lot about your team, how you get into that. And we know that Product Ops is a new entry for the organizational chart of many organizations. And obviously, as PLG rises, the trend is going to go upwards. How do you think organizations can better understand the necessity to employ a Product Ops team? And at which growth stage? I think we had a similar discussion during this PLG Disrupt from the audience, when it's a good time to have a Product Ops team internally, because in the beginning, obviously, you have a few non-product managers doing pretty much everything, but as you scale, this does not become profitable or, scalable at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I think at what point in time, obviously the easy answer is as you're scaling, right? And if you're experiencing hyper growth, and if you look across your organization, and if you look at hiring plans and just sort of where your revenue is going and things like that, if it's growing aggressively, then that's sort of a trigger to maybe consider whether it's product operations or sort of scaling up any other functional operations team to start considering that, right? So that's the easy answer, right? I think the other sort of easy answer is the earlier the better, because you want an operations team to sort of lay the right groundwork, and you want an effective operations team to know, when you're sort of a scaling startup and you're seeing signs of success, you don't need very heavy process. You just need coordinated process. But as you continue to scale up the organization and continue down that success train, you need to know how to scale your process up and down to support where you are in the journey, right? So I think the answer to the question is, when you start seeing signs of, hyperscale, hypergrowth, looking at resourcing plans, every function is growing, the sooner the better. And then there's also very other specific symptoms of, let's say you miss the boat on those sort of conditions, when other functions, go-to-market functions or other teams are saying, hey, I don't know what the product team is doing. I don't know what our roadmap is. And when you find product managers redundantly communicating their roadmap across the organization to different folks, right? If you find that, the team is sort of duplicating research and insights efforts, or, multiple product managers are looking at the same data in different ways, right? So being able to sort of lean in, understand what people in the product team are doing. And if you find redundancies, or if you find confusion around, what the process should be, where approvals are, when do I get my roadmap approved? Can I deliver on my roadmap? I don't know. Nobody told me yes or no. So these are sort of symptoms that when you start seeing these, you should start investing in process, right? Does that directly translate to a product operations function? I think there's an evolution to a product operations function. But the first trigger is, if you start asking yourself, do I need to invest in better process and coordination? That's sign number one that you're on your journey to grow a product operations function.
The second scale of that question would be that were solid points, and obviously, as you grow, your product ops team will grow eventually. But we haven't discussed so far the composition of the product ops team internally at Calendly. And if you can share your personal opinion, how a product ops team would be structured ideally, even from the beginning down to, IPO, let's say.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the four key functions, right? So what is the product operations team trying to accomplish? I think you have to ground yourself and the organization on that, right? And for us at Calendly, I think the four functions I outlined around process excellence, analytics and research, coordination, and learning and growth made sense. But as I talk to other product operations leaders, we're all sort of centering around similar things, but what your organization needs at what point in time can scale very differently, right? So as you sort of are starting up, you might lean more into process excellence because you feel like you have a good pulse on the customer. Maybe analytics and research is not necessary yet, right? Or in order to do analytics and research effectively, you need to invest in the right tools and capabilities, and you're not there yet. So it just depends on where you are as a company to make sure you're investing in those things. So for us, going back to those 4 functions in your question, I have a senior manager of product research who's building up a small product research function to help us explore bigger questions around where's Calendly going, how do customers use Calendly, and doing sort of what I call meta research around our customers, the market, the competitors, things like that, right? The second function we have in that is a process team. So it's a small process team to understand how do we do what we do today? Where are the process gaps? Which are the process gaps that we're willing to sort of deprioritize versus, prioritize? And that team, you'll probably hear this expression a lot because I hear it from other product operations leaders, is product operations is basically product on process, right? So that product operations, product excellence or function really focuses on processes, our product, and the organization as our customers, right? And the nearest customer for us is the product team. So making sure they're effective and then working down the line to other stakeholders as well. And then the learning and growth, that's more organic and working with the broader product leadership team, working with the individual product managers. But fundamentally where product operations supports is what is X company's way of doing product. So for us, what is Calendly's way of doing product? What do we expect from our product managers and designers and content strategists across that process? And are they as effective as they possibly can be to be able to help them grow in their careers, grow in their journey with Calendly, right? And then communication and coordination, that's also falls within the process excellence team, but it's also a responsibility of every function within product operations. So our senior manager of product research, while she owns sort of product research and capability, she also owns effectively disseminating that information across the organization and across the product team. So we all sort of own communication and coordination, but heavy burden of that falls within our process excellence team.
Okay, I have a byproduct of my previous question here. You talk a lot about processes, and I love processes. I think that every single product manager at some point would love to establish a process that make a scalable product. And like it or not, product ops coordinate processes, product processes, which in a product organization is the PLG processes, right? So we have many labels for growth in the SaaS ecosystem. I don't really want to pass over the role from the growth team to the product ops team, but do you think that in the future, the product ops team would become more diverse? For example, acquiring someone like a growth marketer and putting in the product ops team to streamline growth processes from the marketing side, or a customer experience professional that was once in customer success, but now because it has extensive experience on how to scale customer accounts, we join the product ops team and thus become more diverse of a team. Perhaps the process is counterpart of it, not the whole as a whole. These are just ideas that pop in my head.
Yeah.
And I would love your take on it.
Yeah, I think if I understand your question correctly, I think there's two sides to that question. One is, do I see sort of a growth function being a part of product operations team? Not in the near term. I think there are some specialized skills there, and some sort of clear ownership where I think, if you split up growth and say growth marketing versus, growth, activation, retention, acquisition in a product team, I think growth marketing fundamentally should still stay in marketing because of sort of the cross coordination nature there and the aligned KPIs and the success metrics there. Interestingly, there are two sort of non-traditional product teams that I think a product operations team can own, but not as part of a product operations function. And those are growth and monetization, right? So interestingly, in my title, you'll notice I lead product operations, but the two non-traditional product teams that I currently have responsibility over are growth and monetization. And for very specific reasons, right? One is I'm a firm believer that you can't create a product operations function that's an ivory tower where we come up with the processes and then we disseminate them to the product team and we sort of force process on product teams. You have to sort of the expression of dog food your own processes, right? So having ownership over a product team and product operations allows me that benefit to hear the feedback much closer and actually be able to instill processes within a product team that I'm accountable for as well to make sure it's successful, right? So it's a checks and balances strategy. The second point is growth and monetization are very non-traditional product teams, right? Growth, focuses a lot on experimentation. And to me, experimentation we talked about earlier is sort of a research function as well, where you can catalog a lot of the insights and make that an advantage for you. And growth in and of itself, while it follows product management discipline, it also deviates from it, using a lot more hyper focus on experimentation and being lean and things like that, right? So that non-traditional nature of growth, I think, makes well for a product operations leader to own, to be able to have the checks and balances, right? The other function I have is monetization. And monetization is another interesting one, is the classification of a non-traditional product team. And how I define monetization is everything to do from, number one, when somebody lands on our pricing page, what do they see? How do they see it? Across globally, internationally, what's the elasticities of prices and things like that, all the way to making sure our back-end operations are humming along. So in that sense, it's an interesting split between sort of marketing and operations, traditional operations. So having that as a function was important to me because of, again, the non-traditional nature of it, right? So, but then the second part of your question is, can you build a product operations teams with diverse backgrounds? Absolutely. And I fundamentally am a big proponent of that, right? And for all the reasons that you called out. And really two reasons. One, I love the diversity and the sort of pulse of the customer and pulse of the different functions everybody brings, because there's an empathy that you have coming from different parts of the organization. But number two, interestingly enough, I have a hypothesis that product operations can be sort of a training ground for junior product managers as well, right? If you're helping sort of craft the processes, if you're understanding the processes, if you're understanding how research and things are done, then those are great skills to port into a junior product management role. So as we've seen traditionally, folks from customer success and QA and design all joining product, and engineering as well, joining product, product operations provides a interesting avenue to make that transition.
Okay. My next question is that you mentioned experimentation earlier. And we would love to see where you focus on that within Calendly. I mean, I'm pretty sure you have many areas, so I don't really want to focus you to distill every single one of them. Just something that keeps you going in experimentation. Obviously, that comes from customer feedback, and from there, you actually experiment to see if there is validation in that hypothesis, if that would bring more results or increase monetization. Anything in specific you would like to highlight there?
Yeah, a couple. I think there's, customer feedback is a great source for hypotheses to then go experiment. Obviously, data analytics and the corresponding metrics are also important as a source of feedback to formulate hypotheses. What we find as specific examples to really test and learn a lot more on is it could be something as simple as a metric that you're aiming to move as a product team, And I use this expression quite a bit with our teams on play the spectrum, right? And to me, there's a spectrum of the most expensive product investment is one that requires a designer, a back-end engineer, a front-end engineer, a product manager, and everybody, right? Most expensive investment. And the least expensive investment is one where you're making a small design change or a content change. And yes, you still require an engineer, but the scale is very small and you're just trying to learn and experiment from it, right? Whether it's my experience at MailChimp or prior experiences or here, what I love to see is let's pick a metric, let's define the hypotheses, and let's play the spectrum really well. So before we go to the very involved, very expensive investment, let's make a little simple content tweak and see what that does, right? So an example of an experiment at an unnamed place was, what if on our pricing page, we just added a drop down for currency localization? We're not changing the price. We're not changing anything. We just simply added a drop down for if you are logging in from Greece, you can see the currency in your preferred currencies, right? That very simple change took less than one sprint, but resulted in a gross of $2 million ARR.
Wow.
Very simple change, right? Personalization, right? And then from there, of course, you formulate some other hypotheses of, well, what if we actually did localize the currency in the price that people want to pay based on willingness to pay and things like that? So, but that one insight, if that insight had failed, then we might have taken a different direction with currency localization and the bigger effort. But a less than a sprint worth of work to understand the impact of currency localization is well worth, rather than doing a 3-month research effort of walking around the globe to talk to customers to understand whether they want to pay in their local currencies or not, right?
Fantastic. I have a last one because I think I have exhausted you so far. Okay, PLG is very new. I mean, I come across people every day asking me what the term even means. If we think that PLG is niche, product ops is a niche inside this niche because it drives you to PLG mostly, at least for me, that is.
Yep.
How would you encourage an organization that is making the transition now to PLG to train not only the product team, but make PLG intentional, since product ops are pretty much responsible for training and harmonizing the PLG process across the organization? Which practices do you think could be, scalable or a good foundation to start with?
Yeah. One, I think, the transition to PLG, the most important thing for me to really understand is where are you making that transition from, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of conversations I have with product operations leader, the first question I ask is, who's really driving your roadmap, right? And the distinction to me is, and who's really driving your roadmap, if it's our customers via our business development or our sales team, then you have to ask another set of series of questions to understand, well, are you a sales-led growth organization, right? Versus, when I distinctly talk to them about a PLG, what does product-led growth mean? To your point of, people are still trying to understand what it means. It really hinges down to who's driving your roadmap and what's driving the prioritization of that roadmap, right? So in that sense, I think you first have to understand as an organization, where are you transitioning from? Are you sales-led? Are you design-led? Are you CX-led? Like, which one of those functions or verticals are you transitioning from? And that said, once you sort of anchor to that, there are some common themes. Yes, there are nuances to it, but some of the common themes that I see is, number one, regardless of what you're transitioning from, in some way, there is customer feedback that's driving your hyphen-led growth, right? So in the sense of sales-led, it's a prospect that's driving that feedback. So to me, the easiest place to stand up a product or ops organization to drive that transition to PLG is start processes around getting those customer feedback and insight points at scale and start disseminating them across the organization, right? to me, that's a no regret move. The core of a PLG company is to really understand the customer. So just start doing that. That's a no regret move. Start getting the feedback, start cataloging it, start disseminating that information across the organization. Once you do that, what you'll find is everybody will naturally prioritize the same things, because whether it's on, once you have the insights, the volume frequency will dictate where you're going to make the investments. If that's the case, then naturally your product investments start leaning towards essentially what everybody is aligning around, right? So I think customer feedback is a no regret place to start. Roadmap visibility is another one that's super important. So we've invested in a tool called AHA that basically democratizes the roadmap to everybody. Everybody has access to it. I've been at many organizations where you have to know the right person to ask at the right time on the right day, and maybe you'll unlock the first slide of the roadmap, right? I'm not a party to that, but so if you're starting a product operations organization, standardizing what your roadmap looks like to make it easy for consumption, putting it out there for everybody to react to, and it gives you the opportunity to engage in that feedback conversation. If somebody fundamentally disagrees with your roadmap, I love that, because I want to talk to them about it. I want to understand what is their feedback, right? Is it coming from a source of it's going to make the company's operations difficult, or is it coming from a source of no, I just firmly believe customers don't want it? Regardless of what the motivation is, putting the information out there is what's going to source that feedback, right? So for me, if you're starting that transition to a PLG, the no regret things are centralizing customer feedback, roadmap visibility, and that'll sort of get the flywheel going of, coming behind the scenes with process and all the other things that we've talked about.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for contributing to this part of our research. Absolutely. And for being here with us today. That would be all from us today. Thank you so much for joining and watching the session. Please stay tuned for another interview on product ops and PLG coming soon in your inbox. Thank you so much.